Welcome to Module 8, Part 3, the last module for the unit on Islam. Here we're going to look at the two sects, the two major sects of Islam, and also the 5 pillars of Islam, P-I-L-L-A-R-S. On the syllabus, it does say we're supposed to look at the Quran, but actually we addressed the Quran in Module 8, Part 1. So here we're just going to look at the two sects of Islam and the 5 pillars of Islam. The two major sects of Islam are the Sunni, S-U-N-N-I, and the Shia, S-H-I''A. Often people use the term Shiite, but that's actually an adjective. The noun is Shia. About 80% of the world's Muslims are Sunni, and about 15% are Shia. So the Shia are in the minority. There are a few countries that are majority Shia, like Iran, Iraq, Bahrain, Azerbaijan. But most of the Islamic world, as I said, about 80% is actually Sunni. Most of the Shia belong to what's called the Twelvers sect, meaning that they recognize the first 12 caliphs are successors to Muhammad as the legitimate successors to Muhammad. And they thought that the 12th one went into hiding. And it's thought by the Shia that this 12th Imam, the hidden Imam, called Mahdi, M-A-H-D-I, will return at the end of time. And with the help of Jesus, will actually usher in an era of peace. Well, so how did all this get started? Well, the Sunnis believe that Abu Bakr, who was the father of Muhammad's wife, Aisha, was Muhammad's rightful successor. In other words, according to some Muslims, they thought that Abu Bakr should have been the first caliph, Muhammad's rightful successor, and that his method of appointing successors, which was called the shura, which means consultation, was actually the legitimate method. And so rightful successors to Muhammad could simply be appointed by consensus. Well, that's the point of view of the Sunnis. However, there was another group, and they felt that a person named Ali, who was Muhammad's cousin and son-in-law, should have been his successor because he was part of Muhammad's family, and he should have been the rightful caliph, successor to Muhammad, and then all of Ali's descendants, of course, which would have also been in his family, should have been the rightful successors from that point. The word Shia actually results from a contraction of Shi'at Ali, which means something like the party of Ali or the partisans of Ali, and the contraction became known as Shia. And actually, as it turns out, Ali did rule briefly as the 4th caliph, so he finally got his chance. But really, the damage had sort of been done, and especially in 680 CE, when the Sunnis actually killed Ali's son Hussein. Well, that basically cemented the split, and the split has been permanent since that time. So basically it just comes down to a disagreement regarding who the rightful successors of Muhammad should have been. And they remain split to this day. Now, in general terms, they're very similar. They both recognize Muhammad as the true and final prophet of God. They recognize the Quran. They practice and recognize the 5 pillars of faith. But there are some subtle differences between the two groups. So, for example, the Shia sort of venerate and almost worship these original 12 imams. Imam is sort of like an Islamic leader. that I spoke of a while ago, they venerate them as something like saints and build shrines in their honor and do pilgrimages to their shrine. And of course they have this prophetic dimension whereby this 12th Imam that went into hiding centuries ago will one day appear at the end of the age and usher in an era of peace. So they had this sort of veneration of saints things going on, this kind of prophetic, apocalyptic thing going on that you don't really find in Sunni Islam. As for the Shias, they blame the Sunnis for their dogmatism. For example, the puritanical form of Islam known as Wahhabi. It's a very conservative, very strict form of Islam, and that is part of Sunni Islam. But the split remains to this day. And unfortunately, it manifests itself in a lot of the troubles that we see today in the Islamic world, which often pit Shias against Sunnis, as you know if you follow the news. Anyway, there's a lot more to be said there. You have some information in your text. There's lots of resources online, you can imagine, on Islam. So there's a lot that you can take advantage of there to fill out that story. We need to move on, though, to the 5 pillars of Islam. And these are the 5 things that all Muslims must do. We'll begin with the Shahada. The Shahada. This is a simple profession of faith. And in English, it basically goes like this: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his true prophet. And actually, if an adult states the Shahada 3 times publicly in the presence of other Muslims, he or she will officially become a Muslim. And that's all it really takes. There's no baptism and no hoops to jump through and no special teachings to endure. That's it. The word Shahada means something like testimony. So you're bearing testimony. You're bearing witness that you're willing to submit yourself to Allah when you state the Shahada. It's not actually found in the Quran, interestingly enough, but it is found in the Hadith, the secondary scriptures of Islam. Muslims consider it to be the most important article of faith. So of the 5 pillars, this would be the most important. When one recites the Shahada, they must be sincere. In other words, they must be ingenuous, mean what they say. They must be certain of what they're saying. In other words, they must understand what it is they're saying. They must be able to realize the implications. And also, too, they must be willing to submit to the duties they're expected to follow as good Muslims. So there are expectations for the recitation of the Shahada. Second pillar is Salat, or ritual prayer. Ritual prayer. I've addressed this a little bit in the story regarding Muhammad's night journey. And if you recall, that's where he was given his instructions for 5 prayers a day, which started 50 prayers, and they sort of bargained it down to 5. Anyway, so Muslims do pray 5 times a day, and these times are basically right at sunset, just after midday when the sun starts its descent, afternoon, sunset, and then finally after night falls. So these times are based on the orientation of the sun, so therefore they're going to change in regard to clock time slightly every day, and all mosques will have all 5 prayers charted out in regard to what time people should be there for prayer. The purpose of this prayer is to continuously remind Muslims to submit to God, because remember, that's what the basic term Islam means, and also to keep them on a pure path. It kind of rejuvenates their faith over and over, and also to thank God for all the blessings that they enjoy. When they walk into the mosque to pray, of course, the first thing they have to do is to purify themselves, and there will usually be a fountain of some sort, running water of some sort, where they have to ritually cleanse their elbows and their face and their head and their feet, and they must, be spiritually and physically pure before they pray. In almost all cases, there's strict gender segregation. Females are in a different area of the mosque than males. They will all face the Qibla, Qiblah, which just means direction in Arabic. And it shows them the direction of Mecca. Of course, they're praying facing the Kaaba, which is in Mecca. All their prayers begin with Allahu Akbar, which is basically God is great. And then they consist of sort of standard recitations of devotional verses, plus they recite verses of the Quran and things of that nature. The average prayer doesn't last very long, 7 to 10 minutes or so. And of course, a person is allowed to pray wherever they're at, because there's obviously lots of people working in offices and hospitals and so forth. They will take a prayer mat with them, and they will find a quiet place and do their devotion. It's best to be in the mosque if you can, but it's not required. However, on the Friday afternoon prayer, that is the one time that Muslims are expected to make a special effort to be at the mosque. So Friday would be the quote-unquote church day for Muslims. Okay, the third pillar of Islam is the zakat, which refers to charity. If you do a little research here, you'll find that Islam is, if not the most charitable religion in the world, certainly one of the most charitable religions. On the Wikipedia page, I came across a couple of interesting pieces of information, and I checked the sources, and it seems to be okay. There was one poll done in the United Kingdom where it showed that Muslims were more charitable than followers of any other religion. There's another report that showed that the charitable contributions by Muslims worldwide surpassed the entire value of global humanitarian aid. So they're very, very serious about charity. I mean, after all, it's the third pillar in Islam. The Quran actually doesn't parse words when it speaks of people who are selfish and greedy and who hoard goods and resources as opposed to being charitable and giving them away. In fact, it says they're condemned to hell. And zakat is mentioned a number of times in the Quran. In a kind of way, it functions as security for everyone in a society, much like reciprocity does in tribal cultures. Reciprocity in tribal cultures entails everyone always sharing everything all the time, and that way it guarantees that you will never be without. Even if you can't contribute today, you're okay. You'll contribute at some point in time, but in the meantime, you're taken care of. So it sort of functions like that. It also functions to encourage investment and also facilitates redistribution, economic redistribution. I guess the purpose would be that it reminds Muslims of what they have and that they've been blessed with everything they have. After all, it's not theirs, just by the virtue and grace of God that they have what they have, and they're reminded of that through charity. The fourth pillar is fasting during the month of Ramadan. Ramadan is simply the name of the 9th month in the Islamic calendar, so they will fast that entire month. Now, the fasting occurs from sunrise to sunset, and during that time there's no eating, no drinking. You're not supposed to engage in sexual intercourse. There's no smoking. Some Muslims say no swearing. Basically, you're supposed to be pure in mind and body during that time. So it's a complete fast in that way. It commemorates the first time that Muhammad received his revelations from Allah through the angel Gabriel. It's thought by tradition that this happened in the month of Ramadan, so it commemorates that first time. The fast will end with what's called Eid al-Fitr. That's E-I-D, then A-L-F-I-T-R. Eid al-Fitr, where everyone gets together and they have sort of like a communal meal and they celebrate the end of the fast. Now, obviously, there are exceptions made here for pregnant women, women who are breastfeeding, children, people who are sick, the elderly, etc. So all of these people are obviously exempted from the fast. During that month, the month of Ramadan, people are expected to either read the entire Quran or recite the entire Quran if they're a hafiz, a person who has memorized the Quran. And of course, during this time, they're supposed to refocus their spirituality. They're supposed to purify themselves, rededicate themselves, patch up problems. If they've got some issues with a family member, they're supposed to go to them and try to work things out. Basically, it's a time of purification and renewal. And it's thought that every part of the body must be restrained. So restrain your tongue. In other words, watch what you say. Restrain your eyes, your hands, your feet, your ears. And then finally there's the Hajj. And this is the trip to Mecca that all Muslims are expected to make at least once in their lifetime. And it happens during a special month each year. This past year, by the way, it occurred from October 13th to October 18th. By the way, Muslims recognize a lunar calendar for their religious activities, which makes for a shorter year. So therefore, Ramadan, for example, the 9th month, quote unquote, backs up a bit each year. During the Hajj, basically the first day people will fly in to Mecca. Actually, they fly into a place that's near Mecca, not actually in Mecca, but near Mecca. And they will take a bus or some other transportation, and as they're approaching Mecca, they'll purify themselves and they'll change into their clothes, special white clothes that signify purity and equality, because everyone is dressed the same. And they'll recite certain devotional verses. And so that's sort of in preparation for the first official day. On the first day of the Hajj, they travel to Mina, which is a small village not too far from Mecca, and there they pray, they read, they meditate, and they rest, basically in preparation for the rest of the Hajj. On the next day, they travel to what's called the plain of Arafat, and there they pray and ask Allah for forgiveness, and it's sort of a soul purification exercise. On the next day, they travel back to Mina, and they throw stones at some pillars that actually represent the temptations of Satan. And there they also will slaughter an animal and give the meat to the poor. Finally, they'll travel back to the Kaaba, and they'll engage in a variety of ritualistic gestures. Some of them having to do with Abraham and his wife Hagar. And it concludes after about 5 days or so. People who do the Hajj are given an honorific title that actually marks them as a person who has done the Hajj. So this is a sort of commemoration kind of holiday, quote unquote, that reminds Muslims exactly who they are, why they are like they are, and also important historical details of their religion are kind of lived out by them while doing the Hajj. There's a nice diagram on page 397 in your textbook that explains some of these things in detail. Page 397 you may want to take a look at.